First of all, I would like to welcome you all to the legendary DJs of Australia with Mark Alsop. Now, before I get started, I just want to congratulate you, Mark, on obviously this year's inclusion to the Hordern Pavilion in Mardi Gras. How does that feel?
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Yes, wonderful. The last time I think was 2016 or so, playing in the forecourt.
Yes.
So it's good to go back to, did you say the Hordern?
I think so. That's what I read.
Oh, good. Yes, it's good to go back to the Hordern.
It's one of my favourite venues. You know that, don't you?
Yeah, it's one of my favourite too. It's where the sound is always awesome.
Yeah.
We always have a little bit of problems there with the Royal Hall of Industries with sound, but the Hordern just, with their soundproofing, it should be awesome.
It'd be amazing. So your history with the RHI and Hordern, you would understand that things have changed a lot since the original days, and we'll get into that shortly. But I'd also like to thank you on a personal note. I'm fangirling at the moment because that's one of the reasons why I'd like to talk to you and meet you for the first time, person to person, because from 1984, as you have, I was a young DJ, and I found it very frustrating in the gay scene here in Adelaide, where a lot of the music that was produced didn't really, I thought I was doing things wrong, but when I look back on it, a lot of the music wasn't ready for mixing properly. It was always a dump mix here or a big intro there or something like that. And I'd like to thank you for the music. And after reading your bio completely, I want to thank you for everything you've done for not only the Sydney gay community, but the Australian gay community. You've got a massive bio there. It's amazing. So I'd like to thank you for everything that you've done, if you don't hear it enough. And thank you from the bottom of my heart for helping me create a sound in the Australian and Adelaide gay community.
Oh, that's lovely to hear. You're more than welcome. And yes, that biography is a little long, I suppose, after 40 years.
Yes.
It's getting longer. Hooray.
Yes. Hooray. And it's really important that these sort of bios are up in history as well. And that's why we're here today, to talk to people from the scene. Let's talk about young Mark. How did you actually first get into DJing? Because obviously it talks about your career. What got you interested, and how young were you when you realised?
I was about 22, 23, maybe 22, 21. Anyway, around then. So we're talking 1980 to 1983. I was going to the Golden Mile when it was the Golden Mile, which would be Flo's Palace and Club 45, Exchange Hotel, Midnight Shift, Albury Hotel, Flinders Hotel. And the music I was hearing, some of it was inspiring, and other music I didn't hear. So I thought to myself, it would be really good to go out and play my own style of music. So I found that there was a record store called Disco City in York Street at the time. So I wandered in there, and being a 21-year-old blonde boy, David Hiscock took me under his wing.
David Hiscock put a lot of people under his wing, and we've got a lot to thank David Hiscock for. Yeah,
he's a sweetie. So he gave me a pile of records. I searched through them. I did notice that there was a subscription service called Hot Tracks, and that had intros and outros. And I'm thinking, wow, this is pretty cool as well. I can use these. So I went home, bought myself some belt drive turntables. Now, belt drive.
Oh, yes.
Belt drive. You stop the turntable, and when you release it, so trying to beat match was insane.
We didn't get Technics 1200s in our gay club for nearly to the late 80s. It was awful using those belt drives. Did you ever drop a belt at any point?
No.
Maybe I was a bit too rough.
And no one's ever said that to me before a gig. Drop a belt. So I got my turntables, and I took them into an electronics specialist, and I said, can you put a pitch control on here? So they put a little knob on each that I could adjust faster or slower, and I got those home and they worked.
Oh my
But
God.
you had to do some pretty fast maneuvering because the record would speed up quite quickly, but it saved touching that belt drive platter and stopping the belt and having it engage again. So I put a demo together at home and
on cassette.
Yes.
On cassette.
What's
or
a
DAT.
cassette?
Or was it reel to reel? Was it reel to reel?
No, actually, that's another thing, the reel to reel. But it was on cassette. I went into Club 45, spoke to the boss there, and he said, bring it in. I'll have a listen to it. So I took it in, and it was slow and groovy, playing stuff. I do remember.
I was going to ask you that question, because when you say you went to the clubs and there was some good stuff and the bad stuff, I remember in the early 80s when I was starting, it was a very weird time because the music was coming out of the 70s and into the 80s, and there was so much more new stuff coming in. And it was an eclectic mix of kind of 70s disco going into 80s Euro and also Italio house, but also very gothic, like The Cure was coming in and all those sort of bands as well. So what was it happening in those clubs at those times that you were listening to?
The Human League was just coming
it was big.
here on the dance floors. The Midnight Shift was still very overseas clone, not disco. We'd already kind of moved on from that. So the submission tape that I did was more soulful house.
Beautiful.
Why, how, I don't know. I took it in. Mai Tai was on there singing Your Love Is History. Barbara Pennington, Close to Perfection. So this is giving you an idea of how groovy it was. Strange. Took it in and he gave me a job. He said, Mark, this shows a lot of promise. So he gave me a Friday night. And after 6 months, he said, would you like to do the Friday and the Saturday? And I said, oh, wow, cool. And then after another few months, I had the job Friday, Saturday and Sunday.
Did you find back then it was the one DJ played the whole night? Is that the case back then? Yeah. Yep.
There was a resident already there, so he got moved to Saturday, Sunday while I was just doing the Friday night, and then he got moved to Sunday, and then he got moved out. Sorry.
I think that's the same story Lexi had, and I think I had the same. You come in as a young person and the other people might be a little bit tired or they didn't really have their finger on the pulse. You got a gig, you send in a tape, you go get the gig, and then you start creating. And that would have been an amazing time that set you up for the next 40 years of learning how to do a 9-hour shift or a 12-hour shift, and then consecutively 2 nights in a row, and then building from there. And I think that's the difference between DJs now and from people that came from the early 80s and 90s.
Yes, often I've encountered now 90-minute sets at some of the clubs and parties that I've worked at, and I've always said minimum 2 hours, but they don't want to know about it. So now it's 90 minutes, and in that time, there's no time to really create.
No.
You just have to do. So with the Mardi Gras set that I'm planning, and the podcast will be out shortly, which is reflective of the style, but not necessarily, you won't hear everything on that.
Yes.
And I've lost my train of thought.
That's okay, darling. That's okay. Well, we're talking about obviously the length of time that you get to play. I miss it a lot because like you, I played a Friday night. I was always the early DJ and learning how to do a warm-up set. And then those DJs kept getting drunk and I kept getting sets longer. And then eventually we were doing from like 9 to 8 in the morning. And like you said, you had creative control and learning how to take people and pace them, then bring them up and then bring them down and then bring them down at the end. And that was a classic Mardi Gras thing when I suppose people like Paul Goodyear plays where, you know, you have the last set and you kind of bring them down a little bit, keep them on and then bring them down. And it's very much like yourself, It's a very unique talent.
Back then, you could play 100 beats a minute which is Soul to Soul.
Yep.
Soft Cell had a track out called Sleaze, 100 beats a minute. It was just wonderful. Not necessarily at Mardi Gras, more so at Sleaze. And you
Yeah.
could get down to that really groovy BPM and finish a beautiful night off. However, with a 90-minute set, good luck.
Because you
So
really have to know who's on after you, who's on before you, and where they're leaving the crowd. Because I've seen from a crowd point of view and from a DJ point of view at Mardi Gras, if you don't know what the other guy's doing and where they're leaving you, you could disrupt the crowd. Or you could take them on a completely different journey, knowing I've got the records I think that's going to take them there. And that's what happens, isn't it?
that's right. And that's only what I'm taking with me, is stuff that I know will perform. The first track is a mix that I had done with Galleon in Brisbane. So I've done another re-edit of that. And there's a cold start, what we call a cold start. So if the last DJ leaves me at 4,300 beats a minute, like a jackhammer, I go nowhere near jackhammer stuff.
Yes.
So then I have a cold start. And in this case, it'll be a siren. And then we get into the music that way.
And that's also one of the ways you knew who was on. If you have a signature intro, everyone goes, he's on.
Yeah. And there definitely needs, if there is a change in style, there needs to be a gap. There needs to be something that's not just trying for the second DJ to be pitching up at plus 32 and trying to BPM match and then pulling it back down to something sensible around 126, 130.
Yeah. And have you found in the new age of clubbing and people clubbing, I noticed that you're still performing in places at the moment. And obviously there's a strong following of people that have followed you for a long time, but then there's the new audiences. How are you finding DJing at the moment with crowds, and how has it changed in probably the last even decade?
I call them the kids, the young.
They
are. The kids are on their phones after 2 minutes of a track, which is, to a DJ, you don't want to see that.
Yeah.
However, having said that, I don't succumb to that. I don't do it. So with all my re-editing, and there isn't one track that I play that I haven't altered. With that, it's always a 5.5 minute to 6 minute guts of the song. Then I've got an intro and an outro. So they are committed for around 5.5 minutes per track. And I will not go any shorter than that.
That's correct. Yes.
So I've been very stubborn in that fact. And now I call myself old school. If you don't like it, well, that's what I do. You've got to own. I take full ownership of it. And I give those mixes out worldwide. They're played in Ibiza. I know they're played in Europe because I know the DJ is doing it, and I know they're played in the States. So you'll get your venues that have the 2-minute mixes. And it's just blended all night, and you don't really develop much more than a top of the pops kind of sound.
And I believe it feels like you've got your hands tied, doesn't it, a little bit? You sort of want to break out, but you can't. And you've got to go with the times to be current as well. You've got to sort of bend a little bit to get in with the kids. So
I get those 2.5 minute mixes and I extend them, the guts of it, to around 5.5 without being repetitive, because that's the thing. You can't be repetitive, because once you're too repetitive, they lose interest. And that's the kids.
That's your experience, and that's what I love about you. You're taking that in your experience and what the dance floor is doing and what the kids are doing, and it's really important. Let's go back to you said that David Hiscock gave you a pile of records, which was obviously the hot tracks. I grew up around buying all those series, and your name came up plenty of times with Paul Goodyear. I own probably, this is my stuff here, which is just a small collection. This is more like the hot tracks, the rhythm stick, all of the ones that came out that you guys did. I've got copies of Smash Mixes, which are great, which I still play to this day. I always thought, under the impression it was always, overseas editing, overseas producers, overseas music. But when, you know, those sort of mixes came synonymous with you and Paul Goodyear and the Sydney sound. You know, how did you get into it? Who introduced you to that? Do you remember?
No, I think it was more so buying disco nets and hot tracks at the time and thinking, wow, these guys are rearranging the music. And I had no passion to do that. It just the more I worked and the more I realized how they were re-edited, I spoke to Paul Goodyear, who I had known for years anyway, and we'd been hanging out at each other's clubs and causing trouble till 6 or 6, 7 or 8 in the morning. And he said, Marky, I'm going to get a reel-to-reel player. So he got the reel-to-reel, and that's where he and I then co-produced our mixes by editing and adding cymbals, just really simple-ish percussion. And that was what was first released on Oz mixes and the hot tracks as well. So we were reel-to-reeling that.
Wow.
And then out came the digital technology in the 92, I think. So I bought a setup, and then I started doing digital edits from that point, and then continued when I moved to Queensland for a while and did all the Ace DJ remix service mixes up there. And now when I came back to Sydney, got my Pro Tools rig together, and that's what I've used ever since.
Yeah, Pro Tools was very, very popular back then. So you had a reel-to-reel. What were you using for percussion and things like that? Were you doing live recording, or were you using...
Borrowing samples.
Yeah, right. Yeah, okay. Yep.
Yeah, so we would we'd have 2 turntables, and we would play the track with an a cappella over the top, get it right, and then cut that bit of tape in.
No way.
And we'd sample a little cymbal over the track, cut that in. Was it in time?
When you listen to some of them, you know, they may or may not be. I listen to them now, and I still get kicks out of it, because back then we were all learning such amazing things, and it would have been great. Like half the time people didn't realize, really, but when you listen to them now.
I did put my Janet Jackson The Knowledge mix up on my computer, and I tried to grid the mix that I did. I gave up. I only hope the in and the out were pretty good, but the rest of the song swung. And when you hear it, you don't hear it. And that swing gives the track its groove. Yeah. So that's not necessarily a bad thing.
Like, what an amazing career on music editing, and so important as the music changed. Let's talk about your favorite music styles, because it was an exciting time as a DJ to be alive through the 80s into the 90s and 2000s. What was your favorite style? Obviously, the stuff you were editing was obviously some of the music you really liked, right?
Yes, that's right. Back then, especially at Club 45, it was 130 BPM minimum-ish. So I could play my groovy stuff, but that was very late at night would I get down to that. So Bronski beat. And then when Bronski Beat split or reformed, whatever they did, and did hit that perfect beat.
I love that one.
That kind of stuff, Flock of Seagulls.
And that stuff was hard to mix if you had original vinyl. It was. And even some of the 12-inch edits that came out weren't that great to mix with, unless you were a genius. You know?
Ian Levine famously did a Pet Shop Boys edit. I think it was It's a Sin.
Yes.
Don't quote me. And it was all over the shop. And I was laughing to myself thinking, wow, this is an edit for a DJ, from a DJ, and I can talk.
You can't mix it.
Accent, and it was all over the shop trying to mix it, and the edits were so obvious. I was horrified. Yes. But back then, we grabbed it, just hoping it would be better than the original 12-inch. As you know, often it was. Sometimes the original was the way to go.
Yeah.
Because a lot of that vinyl that we carried record boxes up and down stairs. My jeans, every pair of my 501s, all had fray marks where I would rest those record
That's the way you
boxes.
could tell they were a DJ, right? That's the DJ. Look at his jeans.
No such thing as fancy dress when you're carrying
Yeah.
3 boxes of records with you.
Exactly. Well, let's talk about the music again, about the changes between sort of the house style and the groovy style. And then it kind of, at around about the same time some of us young guns were coming up, it was really the Italo house bordering rave, Capella and all the Central Station stuff were coming out at the same time as Europop, but also PWL. You know, you had your Kylies, your Jasons, like it was just, wow, we had so much to choose from.
Yes, I went to Mushroom Records, which was in William Street, and picked up my little DJ bag. And there was this Neighbours actress called Kylie Minogue doing a song called The Locomotion.
I did the same.
So David Hiscock and I were having this conversation saying WTF to each other, and he's going, I really like it. And I said, well, you know what? I can slot it in to my sets when I'm playing a little bit of disco. And it kind of worked, but that's a very good memory of me picking up that back in, whenever that was released.
When you think about it, when it was released, I think you would have been DJing around the same time I was. And I remember running downstairs with it. And I said to the guy, please, we've got to play this tonight. And he's going, that's Kylie Minogue. I'm like, it doesn't matter. I've listened to it and it's so camp, you know, because have you read the books from PWL? Have you sourced? Because there's a book out at the moment. And there's also, I believe a TV series, but I've just read the book from the producers. And it was a very interesting story about the same thing. They were creating music back then and they were traveling regularly to Miami, because I was always confused about the music that was coming through. It had that variation of a little bit of house in there, had a little bit of Euro in there, had a really high camp vocal. And it was an interesting time because PWL was going through the same things. They were traveling to Miami music conferences and picking up the house sound and the piano sound, and they were bringing it back to the studio in London and creating music with Kylie and Dead or Alive. And there's stories about Dead or Alive. How was it for you? Because when Dead or Alive and Venus and all that sound came out, it was that really high pumped gallop, drum, 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 drum. Like it sped things up a little bit, didn't it?
Yeah, and there was a lot of syncopated bass, and that developed into hard house, which I was playing at the time for a few years. But I got on board with the SAW train, just like everybody else did, with Dead or Alive and Kylie, Rick Astley. So Club 45, that was a good venue to do that. When I then got a job at the Midnight Shift, you kind of sorted stuff out and went with more classy material rather than the purely produced pop with I don't want to say a session singer, but often different singers sang exactly the same song from SAW, especially Donna Summer as well. Often you could hear Hazel Dean sing the same song as Donna Summer, and if not, then Kylie would sing it. So it became all very same. Thus, the exception there was Mel and Kim. So they had a really distinct, a really wonderful, crisp sound, and that was a crossover track that we would take from a commercial club to somewhere like the Midnight Shift. And we got a really good airing there. People loved it because they knew that they'd heard it elsewhere, yet it was classy enough to play in that venue.
Yeah, and they also had a lot of good down-tempo stuff as well, sort of like the end of the night or the beginning of the night as well. So it was a really good eclectic mix, wasn't it?
Yeah, I think they kind of ripped off Soul to Soul and got that.
There's a story about that because they said there was, you know, when Mr. Vane came, or Two Unlimited, they talk about when Two Unlimited came, they're like, oh, how do we compete with Two Unlimited? What do we do? You know, and it's a very interesting book. I'll have to send you the link to the book if you got time to read an ebook. It's a very interesting book because it'll make you giggle.
Yes, I did watch the 2 or 3 part documentary on SAW.
Yeah, was it any good?
Eye-opening. And it really showed you why it was called the Hit Factory. because it was. And if you didn't want to sing that song, we'll go and get her. And if she didn't want to sing it, then someone else, and out it came. And nearly everything was a hit.
Yeah, and it was a 24-hour thing. They worked in shifts.
That's right.
It just, and I remember having to keep up financially. Trying to play all this stuff. I said, when are they going to slow down a bit? Like,
yeah, exactly.
Seriously.
So going to different record companies at that time, as you know, that was a big deal, because our vinyl, I know the local records were around $4.99 back then, but the imports were killers. Yeah. And they were generally $11 cheapest to $15.
$15, yeah. So, they ended up getting up to about $25 each. Right. In the two,
exactly,
before they
yes.
went, yeah.
So if you could go to a record company and get a bag of records, it was like gold, because your budget did only stretch so far. Yeah,
which also changed the scope and the landscape of music as well. You really did what you could financially, and then with all the labels, sometimes you'd be given, you know, a bunch of 20 records, and you might find 3 really good gems in it, you know, and you'd be like,
one gem.
Come on, push these for us. Let's talk about the time. And I was really interested in, especially when I spoke to Lexi Bradfield, about the transition from the 70s, obviously, and how things were in Sydney. You must have seen a lot between sort of 79 and 80 and even into the early 90s, when I guess Sydney was going through a tough time, not only with the epidemic, the AIDS epidemic, but also things like we discussed, and we won't name names, but we all know, things like burning down of clubs. And, you know, there was so much going on in Sydney at the time. What was that like for you? Because would you have ever noticed that you'd got to this far in your life after all of that? Like, it was crazy.
Yeah, I know, it's amazing. Back then, I arrived in Oxford Street to see the smouldering ashes of Capriccios. Well, they weren't smouldering. We can, say they were, but no, Capriccios was up there. I could see it was burnt out. I heard all the stories about that, and that was my arrival on the scene. So that was 82-ish, and then, of course, I started DJing in 84. So I didn't know much about the 70s music, except for what my mum and dad had at home on their record player.
Same.
So the first thing you do, because it's so close to the 80s especially, is find out the roots. What music do you like? Where does that come from? So that's where I found out a lot more about the disco scene, what happened to it, the changes once I got on the scene. We were getting more classy. Record Shack had just come out, and that was a label that, God, I played nearly everything on their label. Which reminds me, whenever you go overseas, have you noticed some of the record stores are in record labels? So I walk in and say, I want the new Pet Shop Boys, and they'll say, oh, it's over there in EMI. And I go, why is it under E? They go, because that's the label.
Oh my God.
You drive me insane. You could never. So yes, as a European DJ, everything was in labels. It used to spin me out endlessly. But you'd spend forever in the shop trying to find what you wanted to find, but you had to know the label.
Yeah. And you worked in a record store, didn't you? Because I remember I used to shop at some of them while I was in Sydney all the time. And I miss those days. I miss the culture. I miss flying into Sydney, rolling into Central Station, or what was the one across from Central Station over in the mall? Do you remember, on Oxford Street? There was a small mall there, but there was a couple I used to go and just sit there all day.
You know? Oh yeah. That will come to me, his name.
At Johnny, this age, I keep forgetting things. I can just...
I called Johnny ran it.
Johnny, his name was, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Yes.
I started in Disco City, so they moved to Pitt Street, and then I started work there, and I was doing all the warehouse parties, not all of them, most of the warehouse parties, the Horton Pavilion parties, and I was like a pig in hay, let's say.
You must have had an edge, because working in a record store was one thing I always wanted to do, and I could never get a job in a record store until the end. So carry on. It must have been really good.
and it was with David Hiscock. So now we were working side by side. I'd go out and visit him at the Newtown Hotel, and he'd be playing all the new stuff that had come in, all on cassette, don't forget, because
Yes.
David would record it on cassette, and he had the pitch control cassette players. And that's how he worked, even when he did Mardi Gras. He took
Wow.
those in with him.
That's amazing.
And shortly, I think I stayed at Disco City for a few years, and they put on the Paradise Garage parties. So thus, David Hiscock, Rob Davis, myself, we were doing most of those parties.
Yes.
Then the Horden got bigger, and I went and started working at Central Station Records, and they were also in Pitt Street, but more towards Central Station.
Do you remember what year they came into Australia? Because you were part of the book as well, Music Wars, and there is some information. I haven't read the book for years, but it was late 80s, wasn't it?
Yes.
Mm.
Yes.
Because they landed in Sydney before they came to Adelaide.
I do remember that they were Melbourne for quite some time. Then they'd opened up the Sydney store.
Right. So they're Melbourne first.
Then, yes, Melbourne was their home.
And then they had the label in Sydney.
That's right.
Yeah.
And it was late 90s, because I clearly remember I was working at the Horden or RHI every couple of weeks, and I was getting all the records, and there were thousands that were coming in and listening all through the day. And I was in charge myself of doing a lot of mail order. So I would send people, especially New Zealand was a place that I used to send a lot of records. So everything that I knew was a hit, I'd be sending out via mail order. And I've had the DJs tell me later, thank you so much. They were fantastic. And it wasn't me guessing, it was me working at the Horde and seeing the reaction. So I knew which records were the ones to order, and then sent them all out.
What a time to be alive. It's like, seriously, wasn't it? Because no one knew it until they'd heard it. Like, unlike now, I'm just so stuck with people telling me all this stuff that I don't even know anymore, and we've got no control. But back then, it was literally, let's put it on and see what they do. And, you know, if you knew what sort of sound that your crowd was reacting to, then you really had the power of creating a great scene. And then when you think about it, you guys back then had such control over about national music in Australia. That was a big thing, you know?
Yeah, especially with the hits. Both with Disco City and Central Station, if you knew it was a hit, we'd be ordering 100 records at a time, and then sending them out and getting another 100. So, yeah.
And as a DJ back then, we didn't have Shazam. We would literally have to hunt you guys down and go, what is that song?
Yeah, many times you have to claw your way into a DJ box, poke your head up and say something like, oh, hi, could you tell me
write it down?
Yeah, that's right. So I always took a pen and paper with me.
Me too, yes.
And I actually designed the little pads at Central Station with the logo for DJs to take into their DJ boxes to write down
the songs. Yeah, wow, exactly. Wow. And let's talk about also the sort of around about the time, you must have seen a lot of changes just through Mardi Gras alone, like how it all started. It must have been really interesting in the early 80s, how things were going from the 78ers and the 79ers into the 83s, 84s. And when around about the time did Mardi Gras start the actual dance parties? Do you remember?
Wasn't that 1982?
May have been.
May have been before that as well. I mean, I should know because I went to a couple of exhibitions all about gay dance parties.
There's so much to remember, though.
I know. And
I can have a look now, but while you chat, tell me about that. Like, were you involved in some of the earlier parties? When did you get your first Mardi Gras? Do you remember?
Oh, so yes, there's a weird thing with Mardi Gras. So if was a party that was co-produced with Mardi Gras, then I had a lot of gigs.
Yeah.
As for doing a Mardi Gras party, that came many years later.
Right.
So they just snubbed me for the first 10 years of my career.
Yep.
But not really snub, because when I was doing a co-production, often it was Sydney Gay and Lesbian Mardi Gras and Pride presents.
Right.
And that was, and with Pride, I had done a couple of the Pride parties.
Yep.
That's one there. That was one there. Looking around at the posters.
Yeah. Right. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Cool. Cool. Cool.
And they had done a few other co-productions, and I was there often doing those co-productions.
Yeah.
But yeah, Mardi Gras was much later. I did do a sleaze ball in posters handy somewhere in 1999.
Yeah.
No, 1992.
Yep. The sleazeball was the other alternative party, but as you said, as a DJ, you had the ability to turn it a little bit grindy and dirty. You know, it wasn't so commercial.
Because people dressed down for that. And now I'm thinking, God, where's that poster? It might have been 88, 89, right in the thick of things.
Yep.
I did a sleaze party. I was the opening DJ, opening with a brand new album that was released by Janet Jackson.
Wow.
That was my first track.
Yeah.
I saw it floored a few people, like that, because it was brand new. But you know, we all know the history of Janet Jackson now, so everything ended up working sooner or later.
Absolutely, absolutely. So sleazeball was another one of those parties that, you know, I didn't attend till quite late, and I actually got to perform a couple. Actually, the thing I loved about it took me 10 years to get into Mardi Gras, by the way. 10 years. I had the same problem. Like, it was harder for me because you guys had the scene stitched. I think that there was a lot of changes in Mardi Gras throughout the years, as you know, and lots of different committees. And with committees, especially with people who volunteer and power play and things like that, as Mardi Gras grew, it must have changed the landscape a lot because of the amount of money and the attention that it got. But I always found as a young DJ, it was very hard to get a foot in the door in Sydney because you guys just really had the market. And it was kind of a deal where you didn't really need anyone else, and you guys were standalone. And there was a lot of people coming in from overseas, and you guys got bigger names for yourself. And did you do any gigs overseas, or did you find there was any interest in you guys overseas a lot? Because I know that I struggled with it. I know that a lot of people in Adelaide struggled with it. There was a couple.
It's hard. It was always easier if you were in their country, in their city, and then you could say, look, I'm going to be there on these dates. And I know there were a couple of DJs that I used to hang out with. That's exactly what they did.
Yeah.
Whenever they traveled, they gave the dates and the times. However, whenever I traveled, I was traveling to see the world, not see the inside of a nightclub. So I kind of left my clubbing back in Australia. And then when I went, especially to the States and Europe, UK, that's the last thing I did. I'd go to a couple of clubs and check them out and
see what they're playing, get a vibe.
And then run down the local import or local record store and find out what it was. Exactly.
And I think really, when you think about it, Mark, the world came to Sydney. You know, I think you guys got the world was coming in, flying in, doing Mardi Gras, and they were seeing you guys play, and you guys got more of a profile that way because you didn't have to travel to them. They were coming to you.
Yeah, and as for the Mardi Gras committee, it changed every year. So every year you had to prove who you were again. And how did you do that? You worked in the only nightclub like Arc when that was open. So if you didn't work there, that's where a lot of the members were going. So there was a lot of exposure there. So a lot of those DJs always would work Mardi Gras. So that was one way in the door, but every year you had to do another cassette and then later CD of your music to prove that you were good enough. And that happened year after year after year after year. And then one year I heard back that I had not mixed live. So I don't know how that could even happen.
I think that was they just had to come up with an excuse, because I was a part of the live music program here in South Australia for the government and giving kids music for their first grant. And sometimes you'd have to find something wrong because you only had so many spots and so much money. And I think that they had to try and be, you know, as nice as possible to give you an excuse. And I agree with you, because my journey into Sydney was exactly that. I started bringing Kate Monroe over, Lexi Bradfield, as many DJs as I could. And then I got my foot in the door in 1999. Do you remember the two tents across the road at Mardi Gras where they separated the men and the women? There was two big tops. I think I played the last time of those tents, and I don't know what year that was, but I was a last minute ringing because I'd already been playing at ARC and I'd been filling in for Lexi and a couple other DJs regularly when they were playing Mardi Gras gigs. And then I got a residency at ARC.
Right.
And then I was playing really high energy trance, which a lot of DJs weren't. So at that night, I was in the women's tent playing trance, which is playing to the straight scene in Adelaide. I wasn't doing the gay scene here. And the guys were begging to come in. They could hear the trance and they go, "Can I come in? Can I come in?" And I think it was the amount of years, again, that I was playing ARC, that I think there was a lot of talk. And I got still kept pushing my tapes in and pushing my tapes in every year. And I agree with you. And then there was a lot of flack when I did get a gig, because they were really, a lot of the Sydney DJs were going, "Oh, it's an Adelaide DJ," whatever. And I know there was a lot of press even. I've got clippings of press. And I felt terrible. But, you know, when you try for 10 years for something that would seem out of an Adelaide DJ's reach, it was probably one of the most amazing times of my life and my career to be able to play Mardi Gras, but also play up against my heroes, you know. And I say that because Kate, you know, I aspired to be Kate. I aspired to be any one of you, and I followed all of you. So really, you guys did an amazing job in Sydney, and you created this sound and the music that we all followed. It wasn't something that, you know, it wasn't easy getting the foot in the door, but you guys were amazing. And tell me about the times when things like CDs come out and Mardi Gras started producing CDs, because I remember as a young DJ and a listener of music, those CDs were amazing. You kind of got a feel for it. They gave the themes. It was amazing. Did you release any of the Mardi Gras? Did you get to compile one of them at least?
No.
Or did you get any edits on any of them?
No, not at that time.
Yeah.
But I'm trying to think of the label.
Yeah.
Paul Gaudier had done
I know
volume.
Lexi did the one that had the really beautiful the squares with the colours, and they had
Directions in Dance.
No, it was the one where it was the square colours and they had the silhouettes.
Oh, okay. That's
She
the
did,
Mardi
yeah,
Gras one, isn't it?
yeah, yeah. Because we promoted it. I think it was through Sony,
I
wasn't
think
it?
it is. It was this, CBS, yes.
Yes, I think it was, because we used to do the promotions in Adelaide for them.
Okay.
Yeah, we'd do like the Mardi Gras CD's getting launched, and they'd send us a whole bundle of posters, and they'd give us, you know, 20 CDs to give away. And that was always awesome.
They were compiled, but you only could use the music that was licensed here in Australia.
Right.
So I found that a little restrictive.
Yeah, because like you were supposed to get an idea of what they play at Mardi Gras, but like Lexi said, there was a couple of songs that would drop because they weren't on the label, and it was really hard for her because they put a song on there she didn't even like, you know.
That's
and
right.
Yeah, that would have been pretty difficult. So you did do a couple of compilations. I'm seeing here all your play. This amazing, this thing. Did you release any compilation albums on a label?
Yeah, that Directions in Dance is
that's
the
through Pride.
remixes. Yeah, the remixes that I was working on, that is them all together in their remix form, mixed together.
Yep.
Polly did the first one, I did the second, and I think there's another couple in the series as well. So that was one of the earliest CDs. There's a couple of Hot Tracks CDs out there from around or before that time.
Yep, there's Q Pride, there's Smash Mix Volume 2 and Smash Mix Volume 1 are my favourites as well. Pet Shop Boys,
Yeah.
Mixed Culture. Wow.
Yeah.
How'd you get that one across the line?
Illegally.
Or is it still illegal?
Yeah.
Do we
So I
have to
did,
go and search on a thing to get a legal copy now?
Paul and I did a reel-to-reel edit of Miserabilism, which has become quite a classic Pet Shop Boys track.
I love
which
Pet Shop
I have
Boys.
down here. And we got that off a little 3-inch CD. It was one of those little ones that you get from Japan.
Yep.
And it was burnt onto there. So we immediately thought, oh, we have to rework this track. So that was a pretty early one, with some weird edits, because often you edit on the beat.
Yep.
However, the T is, and isn't.
Yeah.
The T is after the beat.
Yeah,
so
right.
every time we cut on the beat, it'd be beat, beat, beat. And we're going, ah. Sometimes you just got to leave it.
And let's talk about also, let me have a look, Eclipse. When I'm looking at this list, it looks like it starts with obviously the earlier stuff you did, and there's a massive change, but we're also talking about gay music as a whole, and I say gay very openly, okay, because I never remember the letters in order. But back then it was a gay community. But think about all the female vocals and big up tempo. You know, there's CeCe Peniston in there. There's Billy Ray Martin, Dolly Parton. Let's talk about those random songs that you'd get.
Okay, so that random song, especially Dolly Parton.
Oh my God.
I think it was James Fraser, who's now in Melbourne, and Paul Goodyear's sense of humour, maybe. They sent me Dolly Parton, and the track was Peace Train, and said, do a mix of it.
Love it.
And then they released it on Ace remix servers.
Did that ever get dropped at a bigger party? Do you think?
Oh, so at that time I was living in Queensland and visiting Sydney. I never heard it at the bigger parties, but I do know there are some major fans of
that song.
mix. So yeah, there is some random stuff in there. We did Calling Mr. Vane.
Yes, you got Dreamer in there. You've got S Express. Now that was around about the time when music was really changing, wasn't it? Like you had all the I mean, my background was sort of like where you started here. Ken Laszlo, Hey Hey Guy, and Rocket to Your Heart. What an amazing time that was, you know, the early Divine and all that sort of stuff. Then you're going into things like Jellyhead, Crush. That was also an amazing time. The high energy Euro that was coming out with the big
and the syncopated bass. It was all just going off.
So high energy. And let's talk about, and a lot of people don't talk about it because of the legalities of it, but let's talk about the drug culture and the music at the time. Like seriously, the music usually would make people go off because of the music, but when you added the drug culture on top of that, sometimes when I'd be in that Mardi Gras dance floor and that whole place would erupt over a simple sound or a simple, you know, vocal that would come in. How is that? What's some of your, maybe if you can remember a moment in one of the biggest tracks that you didn't expect to get maybe and a big reaction, or you knew it was going to be a reaction and then it was just blows your head?
You know, I do remember on occasion playing the wrong mix on the vinyl.
Which could be done easily.
Randomly played the wrong mix and I hated it and the crowd went off. And I'm going, what the hell? What's that about?
Put a sticker on that side.
You're right. And I remember working in the middle of the dance floor at a Rat co-production with Pride. I think it was with Pride. So they set us up in the middle of the dance floor and then the Bose fold back, which we don't call fold back anymore, kids. What do they call it? Monitors.
Monitors, yes.
Back in, I still call them fold back. And I sat up there and I started my DJ set. I turned them up. This was around, it was the middle set. So the horn was already happening.
Pumping, yeah.
I turned up the fold back monitor and all I got was going, no, what is this? And next minute, you're on. Now we had beats hitting me from everywhere,
Gallops, yes.
or from each speaker arriving at a different time. So I had 2 copies of the Pet Shop Boys' new album, and Introspective,
Yes.
and left to my own devices has that beautiful orchestral start. So I let it go, had my second copy, and then mixed into it again and again and again, and then let the beat drop. Fucking crowd went off. It was like, oh my God. And for the rest of my set, I must say, I could not mix. I could not get a beat in order. I was so unhappy. I went out onto the dance floor to join my friends after my set, really, really
Upset.
not happy.
Yeah, yeah.
How many people came up and said, oh my God, fucking best set ever? And I'm looking at them, and it wasn't just 1 or 2, it was nearly everyone I met. And that's when I realized the power of drugs, because they definitely needed them to think that that was a good set. Well, you know, the music was there, but the mixing was completely shot. And as you know, Ecstasy had just been in London. It was still in London. It was getting imported over illegally, of course, to Australia. And that hit with our warehouse scene. And that, sure, Special K cocaine had come before that, but it was the Ecstasy that just lifted everyone off the ground. It was the proper strength. It was the proper drug. Everyone would walk around saying they loved each other, even if you were arch enemies. And the music just enveloped you in warmth and love. And thus, there wasn't much aggressive music. Sure, there was the motivate bass line that went but it was all in a key that was happy and
it was in comparison to, say, hard
love.
Yeah. In comparison to, say, Tony DeWitt style hard house, which was a lot of the stuff that was going on in England, I didn't find Motivate or anything like that hard. I guess Sydney was very housey and very disco. And even when I listened to a lot of Paul's early stuff and his current stuff, that was a sort of era that I fell into, the high energy Euro into trance, because there's that whole element of that uplifting element and bringing it from one stage to the next. And it was just another element that the drugs help. And it was amazing being on the dance floor. My most memorable moment was the year that I think the Mardi Gras CD came out with those beautiful images with the flowers, and it was a pink CD, and Love, 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 Here I Come by Rollo Goes Mystic. It was the first time I'd heard it on the CD. But we had gone over to Mardi Gras, and we were in, I think it was the Horden, and it was one of my first Mardi Gras, actually, because I didn't go to a lot of the early ones. And I remember I didn't even know what ecstasy was until we discovered it that year. And we thought, oh, I might take half a pill. And all I remember is standing next to those massive speaker stacks near them and just watching and observing. And the lights went down into the breakdown, and it's, you know, that really long breakdown. And then it just hit and the lasers came up, and I still get chills. Yeah. And that's the sort of feeling that we got from the crowd's point of view. And just the first time, we just looked at my girlfriend and I said, oh my, we just went like this, oh God. And they're that feeling you get when everyone is roaring at the same time. And it was just incredible. And you guys were in charge of that stuff. That was just amazing.
What, the ecstasy?
No, the music, just
right, that one.
The planning, yes, the planning and the timing of songs was so important, and the choice of songs, wasn't it?
Yeah, I remember with Paul Holden, we were setting up for the Bacchanalia, the very first Bacchanalia, and he would use the Concord sound system. What a sound system. Yeah. Big boxes on the dance floor. And to say, it was just heart thumping, it would almost thump your liver out of your cage.
The jelly in your brain.
Yeah, and hearing wise, my ears never heard. And Paul and I are in the middle of the floor, and I'm thinking, this is just happening. And he's like, no, I need to take some frequencies out there and I need to do that. So off he toddle. for the next hour and a half, he's playing with the frequencies.
Oh,
And
bless
I'm
him.
thinking, wow, yeah, I know,
He was on
right?
it. He was on it. He was a favourite in
And on the
Adelaide.
night, yeah,
He was a
he was.
massive favourite on the straight scene, and I remember playing like clubs like Heaven here in Adelaide and all the warehouse parties for the young kids, and they just adored him. He was quite a regular down here.
Well, that was really funny because he started with, but you know, we did the Bacchanalias and it was Technotronic and Inner City and Bananarama, and thus, and then he went on to do kind of wiped the gay scene and went to complete rave.
Mhm.
So when there was the benefit night after Paul had died, I was one of the early DJs and I put a set together of the stuff we used to play at the
Early parties, yeah.
Bacchanalia parties. And it was in such contrast
Yeah.
to what all the other DJs thought that he played. And to say it stood out was an understatement.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think
because
that
it's like, who's playing Venus? Who's playing Bananarama here? What's going on? But that's what I knew Paul for. So, and the Pet Shop Boys. So,
Yeah.
you know, I put together my set, played live, toddled off, listened to the other DJs and went, whoa,
Was
boy.
Paul the same age as us? Do you know?
As far
Because
as I know,
back then it was really funny because I did 13 years in the gay community in the one club, Mars Bar, the only club, and I worked, obviously ran parties and stuff. But my next progression, especially around the Sydney time, I was playing straight clubs because I wanted to really take it up a notch like Paul. I'd kind of had my fair share of all the Kylie and all the stuff, and Adelaide didn't want to progress as far. Sydney and Melbourne, if we wanted a good party, you'd go to Sydney and Melbourne. You wouldn't party in Adelaide a lot. But the progression into the straight scene, I would go from, say, Sounds on Sunday in Sydney and play banging hard bass with Baxter, Nick Fish, all those boys. Then I'd get on a taxi and go to Icebox in Kellett Street. And I'd play hard house, very Tony DeVitt, very Paul Holden. And then I'd have another box of records. I'd go to Arc Sydney and play really uplifting piano, female vocal, the Mary Kianis, all that big up-tempo uplifting. And I think that's the sort of progression you get when you have been around the early stuff, because if you're not always, maybe pushing yourself or pushing the envelope a little bit, you can't move out of that cycle that we seem to be in. And I loved my commercial upbringing and I loved the very gay community stuff because it really represented, I guess, the times that we were going through. And I don't know from a gay man's point of view, but I love to play to gay men. The lesbians had no idea. They for a while, the drug culture allowed them for me to play to a lot of the gay lesbians in Sydney, but then they went on to liking R&B, and a lot of the new girls were getting into R&B, and I'm like, it's not really where I want to go. But I love to play to gay men because gay men got it. They loved that mixing. They loved the vocal, what it was saying in the music. Did you find that, during that time, let's say during the AIDS time and things like, I found that gay men were, their songs were always very dramatic and it was always about lost love and it was all female divas, the really strong black vocal,
That's exactly why I adored my midnight shift.
Oh, the shift was, the shift.
At the shift. And God, the sound system there was the most stunning club system I've ever heard. And the sprung dance floor, the leather queens, amyl nitrate was just on the dance floor everywhere. No one frowned. You were actually frowned upon if you didn't have a bottle with you.
Yes, yeah.
It was a glorious time to be a DJ. It was absolutely just wonderful to turn up there. And then as the music changed a little, I got into acid house. And that's what started happening at the Horden as well. So, or the warehouse parties. So I approached the guys at the midnight shift and said, can I play a night of acid house music? And they said, well, okay, why don't you do a Monday? So I did a Monday night. They gave me the worst night to possibly get people out and it worked.
Wow.
So
This is a good night for industry people, right?
yeah, and they all
Back
came
then,
along.
you could get away with it.
I've had DJs like Chip say to me, I'd come in and listen to this music and going, what the fuck is this? And he said, I couldn't believe you were putting a set together of this stuff. So I had my lighting operator, Adam Moffat, who's now in Melbourne.
Yep.
And every week on a Monday was, we called it SDP, Summer Dance Party,
Yep.
which Fanny Farquhar, who I worked with, Fanny said, why don't you call your night Summer Dance Party? And I said, that's a really good idea, SDP. So Fanny definitely had a hand in that because she said it.
Yeah.
And that lasted quite a few months, especially through the winter, where people only went out on a maybe late Friday or a Saturday. We had a good clientele there. On a Monday, completely experimental music that wasn't being played anywhere in Sydney. And I was so happy. Because as you know, as a DJ, the last thing you want is to get a gig and then they say, okay, we have a fully commercial or retro crowd. You're like, why did you get me? Oh, because you've worked in the Horden. Well, that's not what I do. Back in the Horden, I was playing all the brand new music. And I'm still playing the brand new music. Oh, yeah, but you've got all that. No, I haven't. That was all on vinyl. And there's remnants of the vinyl all behind me. But to pull it out and play again, no, I've moved on. And especially with all my re-editing that I do and remixing, it's all about now big bass lines, beautiful, clear, crisp sound, and not the, I know they say warmth of the record, but how many times was there a pop on that record that almost gave me a heart attack, and half of the crowd would be like, oh, Jesus, what the fuck was that? As opposed to some,
as you know, working in bigger parties with vinyl, I think the parties that I worked at Mardi Gras were all vinyl. And I remember the sleazeball that I played had a dance floor, there was a DJ box in the center that spun around. And they had a cage around me. And I played a 4-hour set on this, I said, Neil Crawford followed me, I think. And we were on this stage that was moving around. So every time you looked up, you were looking at a different part of the audience. And this thing's fun. And I remember really struggling with the sound there, as you can imagine, because it's you know, you've got your monitors, but you're moving around. Speakers were on the outside at the bottom, and it was quite difficult because you'd always have a problem with the turntables with feedback or bumping, or you know, and it wasn't an easy task, especially.
And as you know, every party had to be different.
Yes.
Sweatbox went above and beyond, and so did Trash. Back in earlier when they hung cars from the ceiling and stuff like that, you're going, oh my God.
Oh, God.
But especially Sweatbox would completely reinterpret the floor, and the DJ could be anywhere.
Yes.
Like absolutely anywhere. So there was never one focal point, and that culminated in the most stupid place ever in the middle of the floor. And as I said before, when your monitors don't work, and you're hearing kick drums from 50 different speakers coming at you at different times, nightmare.
And you can't even headphone mix because obviously it's too loud. Like everything's too loud out here, too muffled in here, and you'd have to be bloody good to be able to headphone mix in a situation like that.
That's it. You could try and get the beat together, but you're right. It was too loud. There was nothing you could do.
And then there was the delay in the room as well.
So often I'd keep my headphones on all night, just so I couldn't hear outside, even though I'd have nothing in them, just to kind of muffle my ears. And then there was the Tropical Paradise party that was so wet, it rained black from the ceiling. And that was at a film studio. So it was black and it got over everything. All my records were playing in pools of water. I'm looking at the stylus going through the water and listening to it going, how the hell can this still be playing? And why am I not electrocuted yet?
Shit.
Took all my records home
and clean them.
I'd put in paper were stuck. Throw them in the bin, and any in plastic, I had to get them out and clean every single one of them. But what fun we had.
Oh, yeah.
Everyone went home and their whites were ruined.
They were black. They looked like black and white minstrels.
Yeah. They're going, great party. And it's like, oh, my costume's ruined.
Oh, let's fast forward to now. Like, my next introduction to you was getting in contact with you, obviously still doing editing, and you have a chart that comes out every week, and you have a wonderful website at markalsop.com, which I will put in the bottom, guys, if you want to get in contact with Mark. His details will be in the bottom, and a brief bio and a link. How's it going for you picking music these days? Because unlike a lot of people are producing now, music's coming out at a rapid amount of time. Do you get enough DJ audiences to get to play maybe eclectic stuff, or is it more commercial? How are you finding it?
So this Mardi Gras is all brand new music.
Awesome.
But there's a couple of retro classics that I've reworked. With massive killer bass lines, so it'll fit into my tech house style. Awesome. So it's not going to be like, oh wow, I hear so and so. It'll be a new interpretation of it.
Yeah, awesome.
That's what I find. I must listen to maybe 50 releases every single day of my life.
Yep.
Even on Sundays. I listen to them, and often out of that there would be one record.
Yep.
And then that goes into my other computer, into the Pro Tools system, and then I chop it to bits, and then overlay percussion and effects, sustains, you name it, echoes, redesign the track, then it comes back onto the USB, and that's what I take out with me everywhere. But especially Mardi Gras, the sound... We've already said I'm in the Horden, right? So I'm not.
Yeah, I read that today. I read that today because I'll talk about that in a sec. Yeah.
Yeah. So the sound isn't commercial in the Horden. So I intend to do exactly what I love, which is big driving tech house, big bass lines, a bit of female vocal here, a bit of male sampling here and there.
So the audience, the Mark Alsop fans, will get exactly what Mark does, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And my final track, I can't say what it is, but the artist died earlier this year. Yep. So it is homage to her.
Awesome. Beautiful. So I'm reading, obviously there's always been some controversy over Mardi Gras every year and who should be playing and what they shouldn't be playing, and I notice I'm reading here, it says 100 in the Horden. There's also other areas. It looks like they've divided up really well. They're saying that in the Horden, it's going to be adopts a grunge warehouse energy, offering contemporary Chicago and vocal house, headlining Grammy Award-winning Adam Lambert. The forecourt in the open air is for all the vocal house, pop and disco lovers, which has always been a big need for Mardi Gras. You can't have a Mardi Gras without commercial music classics.
So on that point, what happened there was the RHI was always the commercial area, as you know.
Sorry, my cat's having a bit of...
Yeah, and always the Horden was a lot more, not serious, but more housey.
Yeah.
So now that the RHI is not available...
Is it not? Wow. That's a loss.
Mardi Gras has kept the style of the Horden without changing it, which is fantastic. Hurrah! And the commercial stuff is going in the forecourt. Awesome. And now the forecourt is open all night, because when I worked at the forecourt, I had to start at around 6 in the morning till 8. And that's it. You could not have music out there. I think there was a DJ on from 10 to midnight, and then they had to have 6 hours of silence. And then I started. But now there's DJs and even CC Pennison doing a live PA outside. Yeah. So that's going to be loud.
That's going to be very, very loud.
Sorry, residents of Moore Park.
Liberty Hall, techno, tech house, world music, electronica, reminiscent of boiler room setting. And then they've got the Big Top offers 90s and 2000s club classics with Mary Kearney, Alan Thompson, Kate Monroe, and G.I. Joe. Let's talk about Lighting Guys. Lighting Guys was a thing in Sydney and Melbourne, and they are imperative and important to the entire party industry and what effort was always and is always put in, especially in Sydney.
Yes.
They became
Alan,
famous. Alan was probably the one I remember the most.
yeah.
There was a couple of guys that worked at ARC that I worked with every Sunday, and they loved it when I came on because we'd go from housey, then and they
And
were gorgeous.
you would know with the drugs coming in at that time and the Mardi Gras design setting, which the lighting, you would often be the lighting operator as well
Yes,
as the designer for the setting.
yes,
And they were stunning. They
yeah.
were magical. They moved. They would move in, up, down. And the lighting operators worked in the clubs, so they knew the music.
Mm-hmm.
Now, one thing that Mardi Gras, should I say it or not? Anyway, I'm going to give a couple of big tracks to Mardi Gras before the event for the
Yes,
lighting guys to program.
awesome,
So we can have a touch of that magic again.
awesome, awesome. Because
I can't, yeah, I don't know who's going to be on lighting,
yeah.
but it would be good to coordinate a couple of tracks.
It's synonymous, isn't it? It's synonymous with Mardi Gras, and I hope they don't lose that because, you know, so many things have changed. And you know, I read a lot. It's funny with Facebook, you know, one of the most human psychological experiments of our time, and there's always people having a bitch and a whinge and whatever, but you can get a good feedback from people about how things are changing. But no matter what we do as DJs, like yourself, I hope that we have you for quite a few more years. Have you ever thought about, you know, where it's going to end for you? Because I struggle at 58 trying to keep up the late night. I'm trying to, you know, the sound, everything. It takes me about 3 or 4 days to really get over a big party or a set any more than 3 hours long.
Well, when I got my hip replacements, I was struggling into the clubs with my crutches. So
thank God for USBs.
Yeah. So what about when I'm in a wheelchair? I think I'll still be going in, or a motor scooter. Maybe you'll see me with my USB sticks in a motor scooter zooming down Oxford Street.
Or we will take over the bridge rooms in all these old people's homes and we'll have our own little entertainment.
Oh yeah, no.
No, because I don't know how long we're going to last, but I'd like to say that, you know, you look at Carl Cox, he's 60, you know, I'm 58, like a lot of us are still around. And it's good to see Carl Cox, he's still doing his things, but I notice his sets are getting less and less time. He doesn't do the long ones anymore, and he's got good people around him to support him.
I can't see any end in sight. So what does the future bring? I don't know.
Keep editing, keep editing.
Yeah, and that's half the fun, is giving my music out worldwide and knowing that it's getting played. Absolutely. So with the Mardi Gras podcast that will be released, you'll hear everything on there has been redone by me. Awesome. And there's nothing commercial on it. Yeah, there's one retro track I reworked, but it's giving you it gave me, and I'm still listening to it nearly every day going, wow, this music is awesome. It's a great way of letting people hear it, or the world hear it.
And it's a great way of keeping young, isn't it? Keeps us young and finger on the pulse.
You know, a friend of mine said, you should be doing stuff to mentally stimulate your brain so you don't get Alzheimer's. And I said, oh my God, my music. I sit here nearly every day for hours, listening, thinking, sampling, overlaying, a cappella stripping, overlaying, bass lines. And it's just 1,000 things are in your head at once.
Exactly.
So far, I'm still sharp.
Yeah, good.
So I suppose, I don't know, one day I might get told when I'm playing something like a nursery rhyme at a party, maybe you should give it up, Mark.
Give it up. Yes. So quickly tell me availability of your stuff. Where can people go if they're a budding DJ and they're looking for some good edits?
Well, you know what? There's, on my website, there's a podcast page.
Awesome.
So they're the podcasts in a high format. So if you've seen them on Podomatic or iTunes, they're not a 320 kilobit rate. So everything on my website is high quality, and you can get it for free. So you can just download it. There you go, guys. MarkAlsop.com. That's where you get to see this guy. I'd just really like to thank you for talking to me today, because I'm loving mostly getting to know you guys personally, but also listen about the history,
that we've all had in the last 40 years. So thank you for spending time with me today. And
Thanks, Jo.
I really appreciate, and well done on your inclusion to Mardi Gras this year, and congratulations.
Hooray!
Yay.
So excited.
I hope for you many more. In Sydney, where are you playing these days? Are you just playing special events, or can people catch you at any residencies at all?
Well, it's mainly, I just did a meet rack for the House of Savvy.
Yes.
And we did chaps on Sunday, which is at Stonewall Hotel Fetish event.
Yep.
We have Eagles Sydney opening up for the Mardi Gras period, where I've got a few sets there. Harbour City Bears on a Friday night. They have rotating rosters. One DJ now on a Friday night, so I might get a gig there every couple of months.
Awesome. So again, people can go to your website at markalsop.com and find out where Mark's playing.
Well,
and
the
thank
best
you.
place
Yep.
is Facebook. So
yes!
my MA15 plus page on Facebook,
yep.
you will just see everything that I'm
awesome.
doing. But my website, I'll send out an email of what I'm doing now and again. But it's the Facebook or the Instagram. You'll see a lot of the promotion going on there.
Yeah. And also well done for Sydney when we talk about the gay community and how it's changed over the years, and how there's the young girl that does Extra Dirty and the dirty parties, and yourself and all the chaps parties and the bears parties. Congratulations for holding on to that little part of the community that always made it so good. There's these really themed parties. They're dirty, they're grindy. They're still happening over in Sydney, and that's really good to see. Really good to see.
And I also volunteer to BGF. Every event that they do, they're going, do you need a DJ? Do you need a DJ? They helped me out so much.
Yeah.
In the 80s. And now's my chance to give back.
Give back, yes. Well, you're an absolute legend. Thank you so much for talking to me today. And I look forward to maybe one day having a chat with you again, maybe after Mardi Gras, and see how things are going. But guys, you can catch him playing in the Mardi Gras, and go to his Facebook group, and also all the contacts below here on Aussie DJ Legends. You've been inducted.
Yay! feels good.
That's awesome. Thank you so much. All right.